Hey everyone, welcome back to another review. I'm going to be reviewing Final Station by tinyBuild. Little transparency here, I did receive this game for free as a review copy, but this is not an ad. The Final Station is one of the 6 games that tinyBuild announced a few weeks back as coming to the Switch. And it's definitely one that I was probably the most drawn to just based on the little tiny bit that they showed. It is a post-apocalyptic adventure game where you are in charge of getting this train from point A to point B, and then at the different stations that you pull into, you need to scavenge for whatever it is that you can find. Maybe find some new passengers for your train, recruit them to come along on your journey, and then get back to the train and try and keep them alive between stations. The story is told in a pretty non-traditional way. In most games, your character's kind of dumb and they just are completely oblivious as to what's going on around them. Now, sometimes games will explain that away and they'll do a good job explaining it. But tinyBuild didn't do that with the Final Station. What they did instead is they just assume that you know what's happening, and all of the other characters talk to you as if you know what's going on. Your character, I don't think, really talks very much. There might be a couple phrases where your character says something, especially like through the communicator on the train, but in person, most of the time, your character just responds with ... and then the other characters respond to that and give you information. They don't explain everything, but I kind of like this way of storytelling, and I think the reason why I like it so much is because it allows me to kind of fill in the blanks, and I really like being able to fill in the blanks on my own. Like, I don't really know what completely happened in the game overall. They still explained it enough that I was satisfied in the story, but it left room for me to make up my own backstory for people. And I want to say that tinyBuild did a great job. They did a fantastic job building this world. It feels like a living, breathing world that actually could exist. I certainly wouldn't want to go there. It reminds me very much of the show The Walking Dead. That's how bleak this place feels. Very, very depressing, very bleak, but really, really well constructed. And I had a lot of fun moving around in this world. I'm just happy that I was able to leave whenever I felt like it, because it really is a depressing and bleak place. At each station, you stop and collect supplies, you rescue or recruit passengers, you fight zombies, and then on the train, you have to do your best to keep everyone alive. So first, before we get into the scavenging part, I want to talk about the train part of the game. When you're on the train, there's various systems throughout the train, and they don't really explain this to you, but the systems will start to spark or whatever. And when they're sparking, you know that's the system that I really need to be paying attention to. You go over to it, you hit the A button, it brings up some weird interface, and then, you know, through trial and error, you eventually figure out how it is that you're supposed to interact with it to get it to operate the way that it's supposed to, if that makes sense. While you're doing that, you will also receive communications from, I would assume they're people who are driving other trains, or maybe from towns and stuff. You know, you'll have a little exclamation point in the bottom corner. You'll go to the communications thing on the train, and you get a little bit of information that way. Another way that you get the information, like I was saying before, is through snippets of conversations between the passengers on your train. So when you're in the passenger car fixing whatever it is that's breaking, the passengers are also talking to each other. And while they're talking to each other, you kind of start to piece together what's happening in the world, or what's happening with that particular character. The characters, like their names and stuff, aren't super important, or at least it didn't feel like it to me. I didn't really care about this particular character or that particular character. Overall, I felt they were kind of shallow, but that's not because they didn't do a good job with the game. It's just because that's not what the focus of the game was. Now, let's talk about the passengers for a little bit. Each passenger has a hit point bar as well as a hunger bar. And in the I guess the main part of the train where you're in charge of, the communications stuff, they also have a dispensary that gives out food as well as med kits. Now, when you're paying attention to your passengers, you can stop in front of each one and it will show you their hit point bar and health bar. It doesn't show them that stuff unless you are standing in front of that character. It will, however, show you if they're injured, like maybe they're bleeding, and you have to make sure that you're paying really, really close attention to that particular character if they're bleeding, because their health points will drain pretty quickly, and they'll use up quite a few of your med kits if you decide to save them. And you can decide that I need to save these med kits for somebody else. I can't go pumping a bunch of food into this guy that's bleeding to death because he's just going to die anyway, and I need to save that food for the other passengers. And it's little decisions like that that really make the train sequences pretty cool. At the end of a journey, or I guess an act, the passengers get off and they'll be standing outside the train and they'll thank you for bringing you, or, give you a little piece of information, but you get paid by these passengers for delivering them to their location that they wanted to go to. This brings me to the money. The money felt kind of useless. I only was able to spend the money, I think, once in the game. And I could be wrong. Maybe there were other stores that I missed, but I don't feel like there was enough places where I could go and say, here's a pile of money, give me some bullets, and that kind of bothered me. It was definitely something that I think would have added to the game. There were a lot of times where I'm going through and scavenging stuff to get this money, and only to be disappointed that there was nothing to do with it for the most part. Since I'm kind of already talking about it, let's talk about the scavenging sections of the game. So you take the train, you get to a station, and then once you're at the station, there's a couple different things that could happen. There could be a section where you're just going around talking to people, and that's fine too. Although those are few and far between. They're really stacked up in the front of the game, like a lot of those. And then after that, they don't happen very often. And the rest is scavenging, where you're kind of on your own and dealing with zombies. The zombies, they have different varieties, and you have to deal with each variety in a little bit of a different way. I will say this: bullets are precious. So when you come up against a zombie, you always want to try and punch them rather than use your bullets, because you want to save those bullets for when you don't have any other choice. And the bullets are really, really few and far between, which I didn't feel like it was a bad thing. I felt like the bullets were spaced out very purposely so that it would add a little bit of risk to the game. Now, if you do get chomped on by a zombie and you end up dying, the game auto saves really, really often. So there's very little punishment for dying, which is really good in a game like this. I didn't want to have to go back to the beginning of a level and restart everything just because like I opened up a door and a zombie popped out, and maybe I was out of bullets because I missed a couple times. I'm not sure if that would have been a good experience. So I feel like even though the bullets were few and far between, there was definitely enough of them if I used them sparingly, which was a really good risk reward system. Yeah, I could use a bullet right now, But if I do, then we might run into problems down the line. In the scavenging systems, the supplies that you pick up can either be used directly. They can, like I said, automatically turn into money, which you can then buy stuff at stores, or you actually get crafting supplies. And once you get back to the train, you can use the main terminal of the train in order to craft medical kits, bullets. I think that's it, just medical kits and bullets. And it's really good to have these things. So that's usually what you're doing if you're on the train section and something's not breaking and nobody's starving to death or bleeding out, then I usually would run to the front of the train and craft as much as I could at that point. There was a bug in the game that I'm not sure is on other versions of the game, but it was definitely a problem on the Switch where I couldn't get an object that I was clearly supposed to interact with to register that I was standing in front of it. So I would walk away and come back, and then it would be like, oh, yes, he's here now. Now I can push the button, and then it would work. It certainly wasn't game breaking, but there were a couple points where I was a little confused as to what I was supposed to do, because I would go and stand in front of a spot that you were supposed to interact with, and I couldn't. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to interact with that. And I would walk off. And then I'm wandering this whole map trying to figure out where is it that I'm supposed to go next, because I can't find it, and only to come across that spot again by accident. Or I even looked it up on YouTube once and I was like, hang on, this guy just used this door and I'm standing in front of this door and I'm hitting the button and nothing is happening. So I walked away, came back and used that same door, and it worked. It was a little frustrating, but it certainly wasn't game breaking for me. The graphics have a awesome 18-bit. I meant to say 16-bit art style. I really like the graphics. I'm a big fan of the art style. I'm sure that you guys have heard me say it before, and of course you can see the graphics yourself. The audio, the sound effects are really good. Hats off to the Foley department, or whoever was in charge of the Foley work, especially the snow, like walking through the snow. As somebody who lives in a place where there tends to be a ridiculous amount of snow, they definitely got the sound of walking through the snow perfect. It sounded amazing. The music, there's very little music in the game. There were long stretches of no music at all, and that was not great. I think that the game definitely could use more music. I found that to be disappointing. And speaking of things that disappointed me with the game, there's no HD rumble, and I feel like this is definitely a game that would have worked really well for HD rumble. It would have given the punches that you delivered a visceral feel, or you would actually feel the difference between, using your pistol and using your shotgun and using your rifle. I think that it would have been really cool to add HD rumble, and that's probably my biggest gripe with the game, and that is that it doesn't use HD rumble. The controls are basically like a twin stick game. You moved with the left stick and you aim with the right stick. You can't aim up or down, just like 45 degrees up, 45 degrees down, and then to the side. I found it really difficult to aim in the game using the Joy-Cons. It was doable. And there were definitely parts of the game that I played just using the Joy-Cons because I wasn't sitting where my Pro Controller was, but the game was definitely way better with the Pro Controller. This is a game where you definitely want to have a Pro Controller if you have access to one. The game also doesn't give you any prompts when walking up to objects. This is really only an issue in the first couple of minutes of the game because I was confused as to what to do. Like, I would walk up to a door and I'd start shooting because I was trying to, open the door, and I didn't know which button to push. And I just think it would have been better had tinyBuild had like a little icon pop up when you walk up to a door, at least the first few times, to say, hey, this is how you open the door. Although keep in mind, if you pause the game, they do show you the controls right there. But at the very beginning, I was kind of confused. The final station certainly doesn't do itself any favors in the first few stations. There's no combat. I left every station at the beginning of the game disappointed, but if you can get past, I think it's probably the first 20 minutes of the game really picks up after that. It's certainly not action packed, but it's very, very fun. I really enjoyed the gameplay loop. I think the gameplay loop in this game is great. I really like the alternating between the scavenging sections and the train ride sections. Like I said before, the overall world building is fantastic, and overall, I think that the final station is a game that you should pick up for the Switch if you like this kind of game. Well, that's it for this review of the Final Station by tinyBuild. Let me know what you guys think of the game, and be sure to check out my podcast, Nintendo Switchcraft, at runjumpstomp.com.